The gritty streets in the neon-lit bars in the 1970s in New York. One person emerged from the shadows of one of the most feared and admired figures in the underworld. Some people say he's known for his philanthropy and his open-handedness. Some say that he's known for his ruthless leadership, strategic mind, ability to avoid conviction despite numerous criminal charges. Today, we will discuss the generous and the ruthless side of the one and only Dapper Don himself, John Gotti.
Are you finished with getting all the John Gotti information?
No, I'm still working on it.
No problem. I can ask Agent Young to help out on this.
No, I got this.
Yikes!
John Gotti was born in the Bronx borough of New York City on October 27, 1940. He was the fifth of 13 children. 2 had died at birth. His father was John Joseph Gotti Sr., and Gotti's parents were born in New York City, but it's presumed that his grandparents was from a province of Naples, because his parents were married and lived there for some time. Gotti was one of 5 brothers who became made men in the Gambino crime family. Gotti was closely aligned with Angelo Della Croce, the underboss of the Gambino family. Angelo was a powerful figure who mentored Gotti and shielded him from internal disputes. Gotti's loyalty to Angelo solidified his position within the family, particularly during the internal power struggles they had. After Carlo Gambino's death in 1976, Paul Castellano became the boss. Castellano was more of a business-oriented man and less traditional than Angelo, which caused friction within the family. Gotti and others in Del Croce's camp felt sidelined by Castellano's leadership style and policies. On December 16, 1985, Castellano and his underboss, Thomas Bellotti, was assassinated outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. The hit was orchestrated by Gotti and carried out by his loyal associates, including Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano. Gotti decided to eliminate Castellano because he feared retribution from the boss and sought to take control of the family. Following Castellano's murder, Gotti consolidated his power and was formally recognized as a new boss of the Gambino family.
Now as crime boss, some looked at Gotti of being somewhat a hometown hero, while others only witnessed his raw ruthlessness. Our Crime Force AI investigation team is here with us again today. They have completed their research and will be sharing with us the different sides of Gotti. What side of Gotti do you see?
So let's talk about both sides of John Gotti. Agent Owens, let's start off with what we learned about how his community viewed him.
Some people loved him and stated that he made significant contributions to the community and gave handouts to those in need. One of the most notable contributions Gotti made to his community engagement efforts was throwing lavish parties for his neighbors. These particularly memorable events were open to the community and helped solidify his image as a generous neighbor, fostering a sense of community spirits. Such events were not only entertaining but also created an environment where residents felt connected and engaged with one another. Gotti gave back to local community in many ways. Summer block parties. Throughout the summer months, there were block parties organized by Gotti were no small affair. They were typically held in the summer months and could draw hundreds of people, including friends, family, business associates, and residents of his neighborhood. Gotti spared no expense when it came to the food, drinks, and entertainment, with everything from barbecued meats to live music, and often a massive fireworks display that lit up the night sky. These extravagant parties became a staple of the local social scene and were attended by many who admired Gotti for his larger-than-life persona. He built community ties. While the block parties were undeniably lavish, they were also a way for Gotti to build and reinforce ties with his community. Charitable acts. While not extensively documented, Gotti was known to engage in charitable activities within his community. Gotti sometimes provided financial help to neighbors in need, particularly during hard times or emergencies. John Gotti's financial help to neighbors in need was another important aspect of how he built his reputation as both a powerful mafia boss and a benevolent figure in his community. While he was known for his violent and ruthless criminal empire, Gotti also made sure that those in his working-class neighborhood of Queens, New York, saw him as a protector and provider. His financial generosity went beyond just handing out turkeys at Thanksgiving or sponsoring Christmas gifts. He frequently stepped in to help families who were struggling financially.
Residents of his neighborhood reported that Gotti would quietly assist those who were facing financial hardship, whether it was a family struggling to pay medical bills, a person who had lost their job, or someone in need of a helping hand during a personal crisis. It's said that Gotti had a habit of slipping money into envelopes and personally delivering them to the homes of those in need. He would often give out cash directly to families without them having to ask, solidifying his image as a local hero. This type of financial assistance helped Gotti maintain a loyal following in the community. For many, he was more than just a feared mob boss. He was someone who seemed to care about the welfare of the people in his neighborhood, at least on the surface. His generosity was particularly appreciated in a time and place where many working-class families lived paycheck to paycheck, and access to resources was limited. Gotti's largesse filled a void that the state or local government might have left unaddressed, making him seem indispensable to those around him. Gotti's financial support also extended to businesses in the area. For example, he would sometimes help local shop owners facing financial difficulties, particularly if they had trouble with creditors or needed assistance in keeping their businesses afloat. Of course, this help often came with strings attached, as it would sometimes be tied to Gotti's influence over the businesses, ensuring that they were loyal to him and the Gambino crime family. It was all part of the larger system of control that Gotti maintained over his neighborhood, offering financial assistance as a way to secure loyalty and prevent others from turning on him. We have to wonder if there was an alternative motive to Gotti's generosity. Gotti's community involvement often centered around major holidays. Gotti sponsored Easter egg hunts for neighborhood children and provided Easter baskets filled with treats and small gifts to local families. This curious and somewhat contradictory aspect of his character helped to cultivate his image as a family man and garnered him a certain level of goodwill among the local community, particularly in the working-class neighborhoods of Queens, New York, where he lived. Gotti's neighborhood antics, including organizing events like Easter egg hunts, were part of his larger strategy to maintain a positive public image, often in contrast to the brutal world of organized crime he was a part of. 4th of July celebrations. Gotti organized massive July 4th parties that featured impressive fireworks displays and barbecues. July 4th celebrations he hosted for his community. These events were another part of Gotti's carefully crafted image as a generous family man and benefactor to the people of his neighborhood in Queens, New York. The most famous of these celebrations was the annual July 4th barbecue at his home, where Gotti would invite hundreds of friends, associates, and residents of his neighborhood. Everyone loved and talked about the festivities days later, which included an abundance of food, drinks, and sometimes, an impressive display of fireworks. Gotti would often go out of his way to make the event feel grand, using it as an opportunity to reinforce his status as both a powerful mafia boss and a benevolent figure who looked out for his people. While the extravagant celebrations may have seemed like simple acts of generosity to the residents, they were also shrewd moves on Gotti's part. By organizing these public spectacles, he strengthened his influence within the community. Many of those who attended or benefited from his generosity were unlikely to turn against him in legal matters. For the local working-class families, Gotti's parties were a way of gaining access to something larger than they might have had on their own, a glimpse into the kind of power and wealth that lay beyond their everyday lives. These events also provided Gotti with a platform to show off his family's power and wealth, while maintaining an image of being approachable and rooted in his neighborhood. His skill in using these public displays to enhance his image and protect his interests cannot be overstated. By becoming a fixture in local celebrations, Gotti kept his name front and center in the minds of the community, all while making sure that his criminal associates, including high-ranking mafia members, were also on hand to keep the family dynamic intact. On top of that, let's not forget about Thanksgiving. Gotti distributed turkeys to families in need within the community. He hosted Thanksgiving dinners for those who might otherwise be alone during the holiday. He was known to distribute turkeys to local families during Thanksgiving, and this act of giving back became one of the more well-known aspects of his image as the dapper Don who, despite his criminal empire, was seen as a benefactor in his community. Gotti made a point of ensuring that the residents of his neighborhood in Queens, particularly those struggling economically, received a free turkey for the holiday. This charitable gesture, while seemingly benevolent, was part of Gotti's broader strategy to cultivate a positive image among the public and solidify his influence in the community. In neighborhoods like the one where Gotti grew up, his financial generosity helped build a sense of loyalty and respect, while also masking the darker side of his activities. For many local residents, Gotti's acts of kindness, handing out turkeys at Thanksgiving or organizing holiday parties, were seen as tangible proof of his good side, which helped to buffer his public persona against his notoriety as a ruthless mafia boss.
However, these acts were also calculated. Gotti understood the importance of maintaining a certain level of popularity among the community. The more he was viewed as a protector and benefactor, the harder it became for authorities to get people to cooperate with investigations or testify against him. In his eyes, ensuring that families had a turkey for Thanksgiving was as much about securing loyalty as it was about charity. While most people in his neighborhood were likely unaware of the extent of his criminal activities, the turkeys and similar gestures helped him keep a strong presence and reputation. Gotti wasn't just feared, he was also admired by many, and in some cases, even seen as a figure who took care of his own, even if the price of that care was implicit and involved complicity with his criminal operations. At Christmas time, he organized toy drives for underprivileged children in the neighborhood. He decorated his home and surrounding areas with elaborate Christmas lights and decorations. Hosted Christmas parties for local families. John Gotti's Christmas generosity was another example of how he used acts of charity to bolster his image and gain favor in the community. Like his Thanksgiving turkey giveaways, Gotti was known to make sure local families in his neighborhood had something special to celebrate the holiday season. At Christmas, he often organized events where he would provide gifts, holiday food, and other forms of assistance to families in need. In particular, Gotti would personally oversee the distribution of Christmas gifts, often ensuring that children received toys or cash. There are accounts of Gotti giving out envelopes filled with money to families, helping to create the impression that he was a benefactor, a kind of modern-day Santa Claus for his neighborhood. The act of giving wasn't purely altruistic, however. These gestures were part of his broader strategy to build loyalty and maintain a positive reputation. By positioning himself as a protector and provider for local families, Gotti reinforced his family man persona, which contrasted sharply with his brutal criminal activities. For many residents of his working-class Queens neighborhood, Gotti was seen as a figure who cared for those who were struggling, and his Christmas generosity further solidified this image. While Gotti's holiday charity work helped improve his standing with the community, it also worked as a shield. In mafia culture, taking care of the community was considered an important way of securing the loyalty of the people. Those who benefited from his gifts and goodwill were less likely to cooperate with law enforcement or testify against him in court. Essentially, John Gotti's Christmas giving, like his Thanksgiving turkey, was part of the broader Robin Hood image he tried to cultivate, even though the wealth he distributed was often gained through extortion, drug trafficking, and other criminal activities. His public persona as a generous figure helped him remain untouchable for years, even as he presided over one of the most violent and powerful criminal organizations in America. It seems like there were a hidden motive.
In addition, Gotti's charisma played a significant role in how he was viewed by the working-class people around him. He was seen as someone who had risen from humble beginnings to achieve power and success, which resonated with many individuals who worked hard for their livelihoods. His flashy lifestyle, marked by expensive suits and confident demeanor, made him an intriguing figure who stood out against the backdrop of everyday life. And I have to say that Gotti's presence in the neighborhood also provided a form of protection for local residents. During a time when crime rates were high in New York City, many people felt safer knowing that Gotti and his associates were active in their area. The fear of repercussions from organized crime deterred potential criminals from targeting homes within Gotti's territory. This aspect contributed to a perception among some locals that Gotti was looking out for their interests, as they believed it reduced the likelihood of burglaries or other crimes occurring in their vicinity. Additionally, Gotti's influence extended to local businesses. His connections within organized crime often meant that he could provide financial support or protection to establishments in his area. This could manifest as informal arrangements where businesses would benefit from being associated with him or simply through ensuring that they were not targeted by rival gangs. Gotti was known to patronize local businesses and encourage others to do the same, which helped boost the local economy. While this support was often informal and came at a cost, such as paying for protection, it nonetheless contributed to the economic stability of certain establishments in Howard Beach. For example, bars and restaurants might have benefited from being associated with Gotti's reputation. Patrons felt safer frequenting these establishments knowing they were under his watchful eye. This relationship created an economic ecosystem where local businesses could thrive while navigating the complexities of organized crime dynamics. Gotti was famously nicknamed the Dapper Don due to his impeccable sense of style. He wore expensive, custom-made suits, often from the luxury brand Brioni. Gotti maintained a meticulous personal appearance, getting professional haircuts and manicures daily. His flashy style and good looks made him stand out among other mobsters and contributed to his public appeal. Let's now take a look at his family life. Gotti met his future wife, Victoria DiGiorgio, who was of half Italian and half Russian descent, at a bar in 1958. The couple were married on March 6, 1962. According to FBI documents, DiGiorgio was married previously and had one child by the previous marriage. Gotti and Victoria had 5 children: Angela, Victoria, John Jr., Frank, deceased, and Peter. John Gotti was a multifaceted family man whose relationship with his family was deeply influenced by his criminal lifestyle. Despite his notorious reputation, he showed significant dedication to his family, though often in unconventional ways. Gotti was known for teaching his children strength and resilience. His daughter Victoria recalled a poignant moment from her childhood when she fell and was crying. Instead of comforting her traditionally, Gotti knelt down and said, "Remember, Victoria, we don't fall. We bounce. You hear me?"
He seems to be known for acts of generosity, such as handing out large sum of money, having these elaborate hosted parties, and helping his local businesses. He also was there for his family.
Yeah, Gotti helped build like a Robin Hood image in his neighborhood, that's for sure. Which was weird because it contrasted sharply with his violent and criminal lifestyle. But I remember him being in the news like all the time, which I thought was really odd for a crime boss, to be honest with you. I would like to know more about how Gotti interacted with the media.
Gotti's media portrayal often veered into celebrity territory. The media was captivated by Gotti's charismatic personality and flamboyant style. He was dubbed the Dapper Don due to his expensive clothes and outspoken personality in front of news cameras. His trials became media spectacles, with the press focusing on his appearance and personality rather than the serious charges against him. The American media's fascination with Gotti led to extensive coverage that sometimes overshadowed the gravity of his alleged crimes. But the media also contrasting their portrayals. While much of the media coverage focused on Gotti's charisma and style, some outlets did attempt to present a more balanced view. Some news stories emphasized that despite his celebrity status, Gotti was a ruthless, cold-blooded killer. There were efforts to highlight the dark reality behind Gotti's glamorous facade, including his involvement in violent crimes.
Let's start off with a devastating moment in Gotti's family life was the death of his youngest son, Frank. In 1980, 12-year-old Frank was killed in an accident involving a neighbor's vehicle. Gotti's response was extreme. The neighbor, John Favara, disappeared 4 months after the incident, widely believed to have been murdered on Gotti's orders. How did John Gotti and Alphonse "Ali Boy" Darko met? Based on the information provided in the search results, there is no direct mention of how John Gotti and Alphonse "Ali Boy" Darko met. However, the search results do provide some context about their relationship within the world of organized crime. Alphonse Darko was a high-ranking member of the Lucchese crime family, serving as acting boss at one point. John Gotti, on the other hand, was the boss of the Gambino crime family, a separate mafia organization. The search results mention that Vic Camuso, the official boss of the Lucchese family, ordered Darko to bring in a bomb expert from Philadelphia to blow up John Gotti. This suggests that there was tension or conflict between the Lucchese and Gambino families, with Gotti being targeted for assassination. It's important to note that as high-ranking members of different mafia families operating in New York City, Gotti and Darko would likely have been aware of each other and may have interacted in various capacities related to their criminal activities. However, the specific circumstances of their first meeting or the nature of their relationship are not detailed in the provided information. Darko eventually became a government witness, testifying in numerous trials that helped convict several high-ranking mafia figures, including members of other crime families. However, there is no specific mention of him testifying against John Gotti in the given information. Alphonse "Ali Boy" Darko and John Gotti were rivals in the world of organized crime, with their respective families engaged in violent conflicts and assassination attempts against each other. John Gotti learned the mafia code and rules through a combination of observation, experience, and mentorship within the criminal underworld. Here are some key points about how Gotti learned the mafia code. As early as his teens, Gotti was running errands for Carmine Fatico, a capo in the Gambino family. This early involvement exposed him to the workings of the mafia. Gotti learned respect and hierarchy by watching how other mobsters interacted with bosses. He observed that when bosses entered a room, others would greet them first and show deference. Gotti met his mentor, Gambino underboss Aniello Neil Delacroce, early in his criminal career. Delacroce likely played a significant role in teaching Gotti the ways of the mafia. Gradual learning. Over the years, Gotti continued to learn more rules and codes of conduct within the mafia. This was an ongoing process throughout his criminal career. Participation in criminal activities. Gotti's involvement in various criminal activities, such as truck hijackings and murders, provided hands-on experience in following mafia protocols. Many of the mafia's rules were unwritten and passed down orally. Gotti would have learned these through his interactions with other mobsters and his rise through the ranks. When Gotti was formally inducted into the mafia, he would have been explicitly told certain rules and expectations of being a made man.
It's important to note that while there was general codes of conduct within the mafia, different mafia families and bosses might have their own specific rules and interpretations. Gotti's understanding of the mafia code would have evolved as he rose and became boss of the Gambino crime family. And John Gotti, known as the Teflon Don for his ability to evade conviction in earlier trials, was ultimately brought down by the combination of damning evidence and testimony in his 1992 trial. You know, John Gotti was known as a Teflon Don, as I mentioned, because of his ability to evade conviction in those earlier trials.
Yeah, but I know he was ultimately brought down by the combination of the damning evidence and the testimonies in the 1992 trial.
That's correct.
Here's an overview of his alleged crimes and the evidence used against him. Running illegal gambling operations in Queens, New York, and Connecticut, bribing a police detective for information, and failing to file income tax returns for 6 years. Evidence and discovery. The prosecution's case against Gotti was built on several key elements like wiretapped conversations. The FBI had installed listening devices in various locations frequented by Gotti and his associates. The most damaging recordings came from the Rave Night Social Club in New York in an apartment 2 stories above the club, the Rave Night apartment. These wiretaps captured Gotti and other Gambino family members discussing various illegal activities, forming the core of the evidence against them. The tapes provided direct evidence of Gotti's involvement in criminal conspiracies and activities that prosecutors had previously struggled to prove. Combined with insider testimony from Salvatore Gravano, the wiretaps presented a comprehensive picture of the Gambino family's structure and criminal enterprise to the jury. Some recordings captured Gotti discussing amounts of money paid to him from extortion schemes at waterfront locations. The wiretap evidence was particularly damaging because it came directly from Gotti's own words, making it difficult for the defense to refute. Prosecutors were able to use the tapes to corroborate other evidence and testimony, strengthening their overall case against Gotti. The extensive wiretap evidence, combined with insider testimony and other forensic evidence, finally allowed prosecutors to overcome Gotti's previous defenses and secure a conviction on all charges, including racketeering, murder, and other crimes. Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano, Gotti's former underboss, turned state's evidence and became a key witness for the prosecution. His testimony was particularly damaging because he admitted his role in 19 murders, including 10 authorized by Gotti. He provided detailed accounts of Gotti's orders for multiple murders and other criminal activities. He described how he and Gotti waited in a nearby car while Castellano and Bellotti were murdered.
Let's talk about his tax evasion. Prosecutors presented evidence that Gotti had failed to file income tax returns for 6 years while claiming to work as a plumbing company salesman. Gotti had substantial unexplained wealth that was not reported to tax authorities. He engaged in various illegal activities that generated unreported income. Gotti's defense attempted to counter the tax evasion charges by calling a tax lawyer as their sole witness. This lawyer testified that he had advised Gotti to exercise a legitimate privilege of silence by not filing returns while under indictment. He was found guilty. The charges kept piling up and there was other witness testimony. Several other cooperating witnesses provided testimony against Gotti, including Salvatore Mangiavellano, who testified about Peter Gotti's, John's brother, orders to murder Gravano. Michael DeLeonardo, who corroborated information about Gotti's involvement in construction industry extortion. Frank Fapiano, who testified about delivering profits from extortion to Gotti. Now let's get to the trial and conviction. The trial, which began on January 21, 1992, and lasted until April 2, 1992, was held in Brooklyn's federal courthouse. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney John Gleason, presented a comprehensive case that included wiretapped conversations, testimony from former Gambino family members, financial records, and evidence of obstruction of justice and jury tampering in previous trials. After a 6-week trial, the jury found Gotti guilty on all 13 counts, including racketeering and racketeering conspiracy, murder and conspiracy to commit murder, illegal gambling, obstruction of justice, bribery, loan sharking, tax evasion, and extortion. But let's talk about some of the specific crimes alleged against Gotti. Included the murder of Paul Castellano, his predecessor as boss of the Gambino crime family, the murder of Thomas Bellotti, Castellano's underboss, the murders of Robert DiBernardo and Liborio Melito, and the murder of Luis Di Bono, and conspiracy to murder Gaetano Vastola. Gotti was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and fined $250,000. This conviction marked the end of his reign as the boss of the Gambino family and was considered a significant victory for law enforcement in their fight against organized crime. The successful prosecution of John Gotti demonstrated the effectiveness of federal strategies in combating organized crime, particularly the use of the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations (RICO) Act, cooperating witnesses, and sophisticated surveillance techniques. To understand more about Gotti and how developed into an infamous yet charismatic mafia boss, we should look more at his early life. He was shaped by a combination of factors from his early life, the influence of his family and mentors, his personal ambitions, and his environment in the rough neighborhoods of Queens, New York. His character was not formed in isolation but was a product of his upbringing, the cultural context of his time, and the mafia world that he eventually became part of. By the time he reached the age of 12, Gotti's family settled in East New York, Brooklyn, where he grew up in poverty alongside his brothers. His father worked irregularly as a day laborer. As an adult, Gotti came to resent his father for being unable to provide for his family. In school, he had a history of truancy and bullying other students, and ultimately dropped out of Franklin K. Lane High School at the age of 16. John Gotti's development into the infamous figure he became, a ruthless, yet charismatic mafia boss, was shaped by a combination of factors from his early life, the influence of his family and mentors, his personal ambitions, and his environment in the rough neighborhoods of Queens, New York. His character was not formed in isolation but was a product of his upbringing, the cultural context of his time, and the mafia world that he eventually became part of.
That's right. And here's some other key elements that shaped John Gotti's character. Absence of affection from his father. Gotti's father was a stern and emotionally distant figure. He wasn't abusive, but he wasn't affectionate either. This absence of warmth and the constant struggles his father faced contributed to young John Gotti's feelings of resentment and a desire for something more than what he saw in his father's hardworking, low-paying life. Gotti would later say that he wanted more for himself than the life of financial struggle his father had endured. Mother's influence. Gotti's mother, Philomena Gotti, was said to have a much more nurturing role in the family. While she was supportive, she was also deeply religious and more focused on keeping the family together. But in many ways, she was a passive figure in John's development, leaving him to seek validation and approval elsewhere. Brothers and siblings. Gotti's siblings, especially his brothers, had some influence on him, but it was the streets that really shaped him. He came from a family of hard-working, blue-collar Italians, but crime was always in the periphery, with some relatives having links to the mafia. We have to also go back to the streets of Queens and exposure to crime. Growing up in Ozone Park, a neighborhood populated by working-class immigrants, young John was exposed to the realities of crime, violence, and the power dynamics within the Italian-American community. He quickly learned that in this world, respect was earned not just through hard work but through fear, loyalty, and the power to enforce one's will. When he was aged 14, he was attempting to steal a cement mixer from a construction site when it fell, crushing his toes. This injury left him with a permanent limp. After leaving school, he devoted himself to working with the mafia-associated Fulton Rockaway Boys gang, where he met and befriended fellow future Gambino mobsters Angelo Ruggiero and Wilfred Willie Boy Johnson. As a teenager, Gotti became involved with local street gangs and soon started working with mafia figures. He was particularly influenced by Alphonse Ali Boy Darko and Carmine the Beast Romano, who were associates in the Gambino crime family. Gotti admired their power, their ability to command respect, and their ruthless methods of securing control over neighborhoods. Let's be clear, Alphonse Ali Boy Darko and John Gotti were not friends. In fact, they were members of rival crime families and were involved in conflicts with each other. Here's what we can gather about their relationship. Darko was a high-ranking member of the Lucchese crime family, eventually becoming acting boss. John Gotti was the boss of the Gambino crime family, a separate mafia organization. There was significant tension between the Lucchese and Gambino families during the time when both Darko and Gotti were in power. Learning the mafia code, Gotti was running errands for Carmine Fatico, a capo in the Gambino family. This early involvement exposed him to the workings of the mafia. Gotti learned respect and hierarchy by watching how other mobsters interacted with bosses. He observed that when bosses entered a room, others would greet them first and show deference. Gotti met his mentor, Gambino underboss Aniello Neil Delacroce, early in his criminal career. Delacroce likely played a significant role in teaching Gotti the ways of the mafia. Over the years, Gotti continued to learn more rules and codes of conduct within the mafia. This was an ongoing process throughout his criminal career. Gotti's involvement in various criminal activities, such as truck hijackings and murders, provided hands-on experience in following mafia protocols. Many of the mafia's rules were unwritten and passed down orally. Gotti would have learned these through his interactions with other mobsters and his rise through the ranks. The culture of organized crime taught Gotti the importance of loyalty, silence, omerta, and brutality as tools for maintaining power. His early experiences with local gangsters helped him learn how to manipulate the system, use intimidation, and exploit weaknesses in both people and institutions. The appeal of the mafia represented a way out for Gotti, a means of escaping the struggles of his father's life. For him, the allure of the mafia was clear. It offered not just wealth, but respect, status, and a sense of belonging. The code of the mafia also gave him an identity and a sense of control, something that was missing from his chaotic home life. From an early age, Gotti exhibited an ambitious and driven personality. He was determined to rise above his circumstances and sought to prove himself in the dangerous world of organized crime. He was deeply motivated by a desire for respect and control, two qualities that were crucial in the mafia world.
Wow, great job, Crime Force. Thank you for great information and for joining us today. Yeah, I know, Ed, you half Italian and you grew up in Italian and you went to a Catholic church. I know you know a lot about this, and I know this is one of the exciting things for you. So just take it away.
Yeah, it seemed like when I grew up, everybody was in the mafia. Somebody knew somebody who knew somebody, you know what I'm talking about? So, but the one thing I'll tell you is the whole thing with John Gotti, that a lot of people knew about it. And I know there's a lot of people that looked at John Gotti as more the hero, more than the villain. Because, as you know, there's a lot of people, even in today's world, that they're against the government. The government taxes to that. They do us wrong. You know, the mafia was seen, even though they did a little bit of this and a little bit of that, they were looking out for the person who was disadvantaged or had a small business, and they felt like they had protection. And he did a lot for the local area. So, you know, to a lot of people, he was kind of seen as a hometown hero.
Yeah. You can look at it at that side. However, it's the other side, you know, he actually definitely did murders, right? So one thing we noticed is that sometimes he was actually collecting money from businesses as well.
Well, yeah, you know, there was obviously a huge RICO thing. He had so many, like, a criminal organization, and I'm sure he committed murders, obviously, but, you know, he also handed out a lot of murders through orders. You know, there's different buffering, there's different layers that goes on in a mafia organization.
Exactly. But I was just amazed, like, every time, like, when Easter came, he did Easter things for people. When 4th of July, Thanksgiving, Christmas, that's like 4 times a year. I mean, that actually says something about him. He was definitely a generous person, and you know, he was like a Robin Hood of the family, like they said.
Yeah, and then, you know, culturally, you know, he tried to look after a lot of people that came over from his culture, you know, from Italy, from Sicily, and give them opportunities as well. But don't get me wrong, there's a lot of heavy-handedness. I mean, when you join the mafia, you're in it for life, and there's a lot of downside to it. So this is a fascinating discussion, because to some people, he is seen as like this hero, and for others, not so much. And there's been a lot of interesting audiobooks, you know, books, autobiographies, and
movies,
all kinds of stuff on John. Of course, they're different portrayal. Sam Gravano, his underboss, would portray Gotti in one way, and of course, Gotti portrays Sammy the Bull Gravano as a different way. So it's very competing, and I'm sure the truth is somewhere in the middle. And of course, you know, Gotti's sister also does a book as well. There's a lot of information out there, or I should say, or is it Gotti's daughter. I forget. I apologize.
Yeah, I know he
should
has
know
a
that.
daughter too. I know
But,
I've seen her out there.
There's a lot of information if you want to know, and I guess, like I said, the truth is somewhere in between. But you know, one of the things that made Gotti stand out was his fascination with the media.
Exactly. And he liked the media. I remember he said one quote when they were saying, John Gotti in his $1,000 suit. He was like, this suit is $1,800. So that was just like, hey, you got that wrong. By $800 was a lot for John Gotti. Like, get it right. Get it right.
Absolutely.
And his daughter, she did say when she was a child, she never really knew about the criminal side of him. She saw the kindness of him. I mean, he was there for his family. He made sure he supported his family.
Right.
I mean, she was just like amazed. So she never really seen that side of him at the beginning. So that's very interesting.
Yeah.
He tried to separate that side from the family, which was good. Don't you think?
Absolutely. He tried to shield as much as he could, but it's hard. But what I was fascinated by is, you know, growing up, you know, being most of my side of family, because my dad's side, there's not much family that I knew, so I mostly was around the Sicilian and Italian side. And basically I heard a lot, but the mafia was something that was more of like a ghost. You didn't really talk about it. You talked about in terms of like that person was connected, that was the mafia, but you didn't know who all the bosses were. They weren't like well known on TV or you know, talking with the media and all that. So that was one thing, but it was undoing. I mean, he probably thought he was untouchable in a way.
Yeah.
But it's a very fascinating
I can imagine
story.
that. I definitely can imagine that, especially when you have that power. You know, he was handing money to the police and all of that too. You got to realize he was definitely giving them money, so he was shielded. He said, hey, I'm protecting you, you protect me. But you know, sometimes there was definitely witnesses that said that, you know what, this has to stop. And I always want to bring this up as well. I know when I'm in Ed's family house, he's like, oh yeah, I know someone in your family says, I know somebody that knows somebody. So I'm like, they refer to the mafia. I was like, okay.
My mom still to this day says everything is mafia. Well, you know, growing up, some that was, you know, like I went to a Italian Catholic church when I was younger, and there was definitely some people connected that, you know, had a wedding there. You know, it's amazing. It was something you'd see out of The Godfather. I mean, all the people and the guys checking out the church and all that. You know, so, but to have it out in the public so much, that way of life and being real on TV, it was a really interesting time back in the late 80s, early 90s. Right. But anyhow, we want to thank you guys so much for joining us. This was a very interesting topic, and of course our AI crime investigation team, they help us out so much going out there, finding information and sharing it with us. So thank you to them, and until next time,
Studio 70.
Crime Force.